I usually start my day with lots of water and a banana for my pre-workout. Post-workout smoothie is my usual green protein smoothie. To make it, I add 1 block of frozen spinach, about a cup of frozen mango, and then I usually do a bit of cucumber and celery if I have it in the house. I just chop them up in small pieces and added them to my blender. I then add a scoop of this vegan protein powder and top with a cup and a half of water, but you can also use oat milk or coconut water. I blend it up and it's ready to serve. For my actual breakfast, I decided to make a yana using tofu instead of egg. I started by chopping a bit of red pepper in small pieces. I then added a few tomatoes in my blender to blend. I then added a bit of olive oil in my pan and added the pepper and the tomatoes. I seasoned with salt and pepper and let the veggies cook for a few minutes. While the veggies are cooking, I'm slicing a slice of bread. I'm trying to make this even, but I don't think I did a very good job. My slice was still very crooked. While my bread was toasting, I cut an avocado and scooped half of it out. I then smashed it with my fork, seasoned with salt and pepper, and added some lemon juice. Once the tomato wasn't releasing any more liquid, I added the tofu that I shredded with my hands. And as I usually add a bit of feta on my kayana, I decided to add a bit of nutritional yeast for that cheesy flavor. I cooked the tofu for a few minutes and then I served it in my bowl. I sprinkled some parsley on top and then my toast was also ready, so I'm adding the avocado on top and serving my bread on the side. And breakfast is served.
So I just made kayana with tofu. I've never made this before, so let's try. I'm so surprised, it's so good and very similar to the scrambled egg I usually make. I like it. Very good. The tomatoes are so sweet and nice. That's a good one. I think if I ran out of eggs or if I want a bit of a change, definitely will try it again. Also, this bread is amazing. Good start. Gonna go enjoy.
For lunch, I'm making a green pea stew, which is a ladero dish, which is basically a category of Greek dishes, mostly vegetarian, that are cooked in olive oil and usually tomato based. I started by chopping my vegetables in small pieces. I did a couple of onions, a couple of potatoes, and a couple of carrots. I just chopped everything in small bite-sized pieces. Once the veggies were prepped, I got my saucepan on the hob and added some olive oil in it. I then added all the veggies and let them saute for a few minutes. I also seasoned with salt and pepper. I then added about a kilo of frozen peas and stirred them around. I added a box of passata and some water to cover everything. I added about a tablespoon of tomato paste, and since I didn't have any fresh dill, I'm doing a few teaspoons of dry dill. I gave it a final stir and then let it simmer for a few hours until it's all nice and thick. I then served myself a big bowl and this was so comforting and tasty. After lunch I always want something sweet, so today I'm having a little bowl of fresh raspberries and a block of this raspberry dark chocolate. Then I decided to make a vegetable pita, so I'm starting by making my filo. I added a mixture of all-purpose and spelt flour in my bowl and then added some lukewarm water. I also added some olive oil and some red wine vinegar, as I still don't have any ouzo in the house, but if you have ouzo you can add some instead of the vinegar. I seasoned with salt and started bringing the mixture together with my hands, and as you can see it was a bit sticky, so I'm slowly adding about a tablespoon of flour and mixing it around. I emptied the dough in my working space and kneaded it for a few minutes, continuing to add little bits of flour. Once it looked nice and soft and it was no longer sticky, I put it back in the bowl and let it rest for a bit while I prep the pita filling. For the filling, I'll be using a mixture of vegetables, so I'm starting by chopping a couple of leeks in medium-sized pieces. I also chopped a couple of onions and crushed a few garlic cloves. I then chopped a bunch of mushrooms in medium-sized pieces, and lastly a couple of peppers, and all my veggies are now ready and prepped. I started by adding the onions and leeks to sauté for a few minutes with some olive oil. I seasoned with salt and pepper and then added the mushrooms. Lastly, I added the peppers and let the vegetables cook for a few minutes. I added a can of chopped tomatoes, and for seasonings I'm using thyme. I then let the mixture stew for a bit while I opened my filo. I added some flour on my working space and emptied the dough on it. I then divided the dough in 6 little balls, as we'll be opening 6 filo sheets. Once I did that, I took one of the dough balls and started opening it with my thin rolling pin. I usually roll it in and then with a fast motion open it out so I can get it as thin as possible, as we'll be layering this, so we want nice and thin filo layers. Once the filo was ready, I added some olive oil to my pan. I'm using a baking paper here as well to make sure my pita doesn't stick. I then added the first layer of the filo and spread it out as well as I could. I topped it with some olive oil and used my little brush to make sure it's all coated in oil. I then topped with the second layer and repeated the same process with the olive oil. I then did the third and last bottom layer, and again I added some olive oil on top and brushed it around with my little brush. And then it was time to add the filling, so I'm just adding it evenly around the pita. Once all the filling was gone, I topped with the filo layer and, you know the drill by now, added more olive oil as pita needs lots of olive oil. I then added the second and third layer, making sure I add olive oil in between the layers, as that will give it a nice flavor and also texture. For the final layer, I'm adding lots of olive oil and then doing some marks with my knife of where we'll be cutting the pita. I then baked it in a preheated oven for 50 minutes to an hour. And of course, I added a little piece when it was out of the oven for everyone to try. I then also had a bit of this soy kefir before dinner, which was very tasty. And then for dinner, I'm serving a slice of my pita and adding some rocket on the side. And then I decided to cook a bit of tofu to have on the side to add more protein to my meal. I simply cooked it in the pan with some paprika, a bit of turmeric and salt and pepper. I served it and dinner was ready.
Finally time for dinner. I like it. It's so good. I think you get more the flavor of the onion and the leek, but I'm not complaining. It's very good. And I do like the phyllo as well. I didn't find my all-purpose flours. I used about half and half of all-purpose flour and spelt flour. And I quite like that because it feels a bit more wholesome. I also made a bit more tofu because I feel like I needed some sort of protein in this meal, because otherwise it's just veg and carbs. Should have made more. So good. It's very simple, but for some reason it's very tasty. I also went out to a local greengrocer and I got some exciting stuff. At least I think they're exciting. So I thought I'd show you. So I found my favorite soy Greek style yogurt. I used to have that when I was more plant-based. It's actually very good. And then I found a soy kefir. I couldn't resist, and I've already had some and it tastes very good. More tea, because I love tea, and this one is actually caffeine free. I can smell it already. It's cinnamon, cardamom and ginger. I remember I used to have that at a cafe in Greece when I used to be a student, and they had this and I loved it, so I just saw it and I thought I'd try it again. I got these vegan chocolate macaroons and I got this chocolate tiffin, which looks amazing. Did I get anything else? I think that was it. Also got some ginger and turmeric, but you know how they look like.
It's the next day and for breakfast I'm having a slice of my vegetable pita, so I'm just warming it up in the oven for a few minutes. For my morning snack I'm making a hot chocolate, and this recipe is my favorite as I don't like an overly sweet chocolate. To make it I added some oat milk in my saucepan, 2.5 teaspoons of cacao powder, a teaspoon of maple syrup and a small piece of dark chocolate. I whisked it well and let it warm for a few minutes. For lunch we're making gigantes, aka baked butter beans. I've been soaking my gigantes beans from the night before, so I'm just rinsing them so they're ready to cook. And for veggies, I'm chopping up 2 carrots and a red onion in small pieces. I then added some water in my saucepan and then all the veggies and beans. I also added some passata and seasoned with salt and pepper. And for a bit of extra flavor, I'm crumbling up a veggie stock cube. I let it cook for a few hours or until the butter beans are soft and edible. I then transferred the beans in a baking dish and topped with some chopped parsley. I mixed that around too and put it in a preheated oven to bake for 30 to 45 minutes. Once it was cooked, I took it out of the oven and topped with some fresh parsley. I added some rocket to my plate and then served myself a big serving of the gigantes.
It's amazing. It's so good. The only thing missing, I must say, is feta.
After lunch, I decided to make an apple pie, so I'm starting by chopping the apples in thin slices. I'm using green apples as I love their tart flavor, but let me know in the comments what's your favorite apple. There's so many to choose from, but I think my all-time favorite is green apple. So I added my apples to my pan and forgot I had to add some oat flour, maple syrup and cinnamon, so I'm just doing that and giving them a mix in the pan. I then covered it with some foil and let it bake for a bit while I prep my pie topping. To make it, I started by making a flax egg. Once it had thickened up, I added it to my bowl. I then added some vanilla, maple syrup, olive oil and soy yogurt. And for my dry ingredients, I'm using oat flour and corn flour. I seasoned with a bit of salt and gave the mixture a good mix, and since it looked a bit dry, I'm adding little splashes of oat milk until it had this consistency. Once my apples had a bit of time to cook, I took them out and added the pie topping. I smoothed it out using the back of my spatula and then put it back in the oven to bake for about 30 minutes. My dad had also brought these vegan donuts, so I'm just trying some of this and also serving a slice of my apple pie. Dinner time, and I realized how unprepared I was today, so I'm doing scrambled tofu again. I think that's what I found a bit tricky, is I had to plan a bit better, and also because I don't like fake meat, I resolved to eating a lot of tofu to make sure I get enough proteins. I'm also making a quick daco salad for the side, so I'm serving some of these rasks on my plate and then topping with baby tomatoes, and then added the scrambled tofu on the side. And then thought this meal was lacking something green, so I chopped up a bit of cucumber and served it on the side, and that was dinner. For my post-workout smoothie today, I'm mixing things up and making a banana and chocolate one. To make it, I started by adding half a banana in my blender. I then added a scoop of vegan protein powder. I then added some cacao powder, I think I did about a tablespoon, and then some oat milk on top. I blended and enjoyed my chocolatey smoothie after my workout. And then for breakfast, I'm going back to cayena, aka scrambled tofu with tomatoes and pepper, as it was delicious, and my mom tried it the other day and wanted some, so I'm making a massive portion for both of us. I just added the pepper and tomato to cook and season with salt, pepper, some paprika, and some nutritional yeast. Exactly as I prepped it on the first day, as it came out delicious. I then scrambled the tofu and let everything cook for a few more minutes. I served some in my bowl, and unfortunately I was out of parsley, but if you have it, definitely add some parsley as it gives such a nice fresh flavor. For lunch we're making pasticcio, one of my favorite Greek dishes, but I'm making it into a vegan version of course. To start, I'm adding some mushrooms in my food processor to chop them finely. I then chopped an onion in small pieces and also grated a carrot. And now all the veggies are prepped, I'm adding my saucepan to the hob and adding some olive oil. Once the oil was hot, I added the onion and carrot to saute for a few minutes. I then added the mushrooms and let them cook for a few minutes too. I seasoned with salt and pepper and then added a can of lentils and about half a packet of tofu as it was open and to increase the protein of the meal a bit. And it also added a nice texture. I then added a can of chopped tomatoes and some passata. I added a couple of bay leaves and a tablespoon or two of tomato paste, gave it a stir and let it simmer for 20 to 30 minutes. While the lentil sauce was stewing, I went ahead and boiled my pasta. This is the traditional pasta for pasticcio, which my parents brought for me from Greece, but if you can't find these, rigatoni would also work well. And then the final step for pasticcio is our bechamel, so I'm just adding some olive oil and flour in my pan. I'm giving it a whisk and then adding some oat milk and continuing to whisk until it has my desired consistency. At the end, I season with salt and pepper, and I usually like to grate a bit of nutmeg too, but I didn't have any today. And now my pasta is cooked, so I'm adding them on the bottom of my pan and spreading them around evenly. I then topped with all the lentil sauce, again trying to spread it evenly. And then finally I topped with the bechamel, and I realized that I should have made more bechamel as that was a very thin layer of it at the top and I like a lot of bechamel, so would probably double the portion I made here. I then topped with some Paco breadcrumbs, but if you're in Greece, frigagna would also work perfectly for this, but I just can't find any in the UK. And while it's baking, I'm making a quick coleslaw, so I'm chopping a couple of pieces of this red cabbage to use. I'm grating a couple of carrots and then using my mandolin slicer to shred the cabbage. I added those in a bowl and then also added a bit of red onion. I seasoned with salt and added some olive oil and red wine vinegar. I gave it a mix and decided to also add some fresh dill as I love the flavor it gives. I served some green salad on my bowl and then some of the coleslaw on the side too. And then, as always, I was too impatient to wait for the pasticcio to cool properly before I cut it, so it looks nothing like pasticcio and more like random pasta dish, but yeah, it tasted delicious, so it doesn't matter, but for reference you can see a bit of the layers here. After lunch I had a bit of this vegan donut again, and then dinner is where I cracked and I couldn't keep it to my vegan meals as the thought of a cheeseless pizza made me very sad. So here's a vegan pizza for reference. If you don't want to see non-vegan meals, you can skip to this time. But yeah, we ordered a variety of pizzas, so I had a bit of everything. My favorite is the butternut squash base and andouille and gorgonzola one, but they were all delicious to be honest, and of course I had loads of those truffle fries. Today's breakfast is avocado and hummus toast, so I'm starting by cutting a couple of slices from this bread to toast. I removed the seed from this avocado and scooping it out. I seasoned with salt and pepper and some lemon juice of course. I also cut a few cucumber slices with my mandolin slicer. Once my bread was toasted, I added it to my plate and added the avocado in one half. And for the other half, I'm spreading some hummus. I added the cucumber slices on the hummus toast and breakfast was ready. Very simple but so delicious and quick to make. And a quick lunch today, so I'm serving some salad to my bowl and then adding a big slice of my pasticcio from the day before.
It's even better today somehow. It's so good. Perfect on a snowy day.
And then I've been craving homemade twigs for so long, so I decided today was the day to make them. For the base I'm using almond flour and coconut flour. I seasoned with a bit of salt and added some coconut oil and maple syrup. I gave it a mix and then emptied it in my baking pan, which I realized was a bit too big for this, so I'm leaving about a quarter empty and just pushing it with my fingers to create the shape I want. I then baked it for 10 minutes. While it was baking, I made my caramel sauce. I added some almond butter to a little saucepan together with some coconut oil and maple syrup. I also love the natural taste of caramel that dates give, so I added a cup of those too. I warmed it up for a few minutes, stirring around, and when the dates were soft enough, I started mashing them with my potato masher. And I always forget to add something, so I just added some vanilla extract and gave it another good mix. Once the caramel was ready, I added it on top of the biscuit base and put it in the fridge to harden a bit before I add the chocolate. And then once it had been in the fridge for a bit, I added the chocolate, which was just a blend of dark chocolate and a bit of coconut oil melted together. I then placed it in the fridge for everything to set. And we're now finally ready to serve, so I'm just cutting them up in small pieces and look how perfect those layers are. I just had a piece and placed the rest in my glass containers to keep in the fridge for snacks for the next few days. And these were a success. James especially loved them so much they didn't last long in the fridge. Later on, I had another snack, so I just got a packet of these barbecue nuts and also a green apple. For dinner, I decided to make souvlaki, so I'm starting by prepping my tofu. I'm doing like a gyros kind of thing, so I'm just slicing it in thin slices and then cutting them in half so it looks like gyros pieces. I then added some olive oil in my pan, and once it was hot, I added the slices of tofu, making sure there's enough space for all of them to touch the pan. I seasoned with salt, pepper, thyme, garlic and paprika, but you can adjust this based on your likings. I let them cook for a few minutes before flipping them to the other side so they can crisp up. And while the tofu is cooking, I'm making a quick tzatziki. I'm starting by grating about half a cucumber. I then added it to a strainer and press it with my hand to get rid of the excess water. And for our yogurt, I'll be using this Greek-style soy yogurt as I love the thick texture it has. I added a clove of garlic and then added the strained cucumber. And I always do that. I think there's enough space to make it in the yogurt container, but I'm always wrong, so I eventually gave up and adding everything to a separate bowl. I added a bit of fresh dill, olive oil and red wine vinegar and seasoned with salt. I did a few batches of the tofu as I want to make sure all the pieces have space to cook and crisp up evenly. Once everything was ready, I toasted a couple of pitas. I cut them open and added my tzatziki first. I then added the tofu gyros and then topped with some tomato and onion. I kept it classic with mine, but you can do whatever toppings you like. I then topped with some paprika and dinner was ready. For breakfast today, I'm popping into Starbucks to get my favorite thing from them, which is this Beyond Meat breakfast sandwich. It's so good, especially with a cup of tea. And then at lunch, I decided to go to this falafel place in town and get a falafel pita. This is so good and so filling. I also had some sweet potato fries on the side, so I was definitely very full after this. But never too full for dessert, so I had a piece of my homemade Twix that I had packed with me. Then dinner, we went to Wagamama with James, so again, I was weak and had some non-vegan things, but the majority of our order is vegetarian anyways. And we tried some new things like these mushroom skewers, which were delicious. I hope you enjoyed today's video and got some inspiration for some healthy meals. If you did, make sure you give it a like and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, and if you made it this far, comment a cake emoji. Okay, bye!